Hello, everyone. My name is Astrid Smith, and I'm the Rare Book and Special Collections Digitization Specialist, as well as a production coordinator with Stanford Libraries within the Digital Production Group. We're responsible for digitizing library collections in support of teaching and research. I'm very grateful and happy to be here today. My presentation is Tackling Tackets, a look at digitizing bundles of late medieval documents. If you'd like to follow along and look at any of the digital objects I mentioned during this talk, access the works I quote, or find some other related links, please visit the following document for my presentation links. All right, first, a little background about the project that contains the materials I'm going to be addressing. The project is called MEMO, Medieval and Early Modern Manuscripts Online. At the right, there's an example of a digitized object from the project, and I've included a few across these background slides to give you a sense of what the project materials look like. Stanford Library has extensive manuscript holdings, and the majority are not described even at the basic level, which means that it would be really difficult to access something you're looking for unless you were sifting through archival boxes and reading each item. The memo project was designed and proposed by Ben Albritton to address that issue in a way that supports student and library interactions. We started planning meetings in early 2022. The idea was that two student workers would describe the digital objects to build out their library catalog records, gathering basic metadata like dates, place names, and types of document or topics covered. My lab would digitize small batches of the manuscript materials every quarter in the 70 item range, depending on their imaging complexity, for about 2 years as funding allowed. The memo digitization project team was made up of the project manager, Ben Albritton, myself as the production coordinator, and our imaging team consisted of our lead photographer, Wayne Vanderkuel, me again, and lab assistant Justine Shi during the first quarter. And performing post-production and QC were Jen Diaz and John Pearson. I'd like to mention that in this project, like most digitization projects, post-production and QC, including cropping, straightening, and basically making sure everything is beautiful before it goes online, makes up about 2/3 of the work or more. An update on how the project is going to date. We've digitized 310 manuscript materials, 310 manuscript materials, which is about 80 gigabytes of data. And we have 2 to 3 more quarters remaining. In this project, there's a lot of variability. Some formats have been more challenging than others. For instance, when I opened a particular box of documents, this is what I saw: extremely warped materials in large stacks of sheets. Each folder contained a bundle like this one, what appeared to be many sheets of beautiful linen rag paper from the late Middle Ages, secured together at the top by an attachment that punctures through all the sheets and ties in the back. It almost looks like they were rolled and then squished at one time. The undulating wave of the material and the fragility of the paper at the attachment are immediate red flags for digitization, which we'll circle back to later on. Here's a sample of the hand of a couple of these bundles. Reading these at all is a real paleography workout for me, but I'd say that they range from swiftly scrawled with many connecting letters and lots of things crossed out or amended, to a spacious script with elegant descenders and flourishes. As I mentioned, we haven't solidified anything about the content or dates of these materials yet, but that's what digitization will hopefully help enable. So what is a tacket? A tacket is a small strip of alum tawed skin, parchment, or even thread, which creates a loop when tied to itself. Historically, tackets were used to group bifolia in a quire or to directly attach gatherings to a binding. But I know we're all thinking it. Think of a tacket as a hefty medieval staple. Very well put. Here are 8 of the 9 tacketed bundles. Some of them are pins. I don't know if they're contemporary to the bundles themselves or not. You can see one that a couple that, or excuse me, you can see a couple are thin strips of parchment. One looks like a thread or cord, and there's even a twisted piece of paper with writing on the bottom row. The backs are also really interesting to see the different ways they were secured. As you can see, these were definitely outliers from the loose documents and fragments that we were dealing with, and required some creative thinking. How could I apply enough pressure to pull the object open to get to the gutter area, the top, without damaging the tackets or risking a tear to the paper around where the tacket is secured? Started thinking about how when I work with more modern objects that have staples, I often hold a piece of stiff card just on the other side of the staple so that I can pull back against it without damage. I realized I needed to build something like that, but far more substantial, so I designed a digitization handling aid specifically for the imaging of this batch of materials. I started with some sketches off the top of my head. I knew I needed to create a base, a top layer, and a recess that I could tuck the bundle into in order to keep it secure and have something to pull back against. I measured each bundle's height, width, and depth, as well as the distance from the top of the bundle to the tacket. I worked closely with our conservation department and had a consultation with conservation technician Sarah Newton and book conservator Aude Gabory, where we talked over the design, and I gave them all the measurements. We decided that adding a soft sheet that could be folded back over the top would help ensure that the pressure point at the gutter was as safe as possible. And here's what Sarah made. This is a shot of the top sheet pulled back. And here's a diagram of the holding aid. The baseboard is the length of the shortest object plus the length of the shims at the far right. The variable shims, which are layers of archival board, are adjustable so that it can be just the right height for the thinnest manuscript, and I could add boards as I worked my way to the thickest bundle. The top board offered a stiff edge to pull the pages back against, but the soft sheet at the top left ensured that the pages wouldn't crease or strain too much. And here's how the bundle, here's how the actual structure looks from the side. You can see that the bundle has been tucked into the recess and the soft sheet is pulled back over the top board. And here's how it looked with the glass placed on top of the object and tucked just slightly into the recess. It's important to note that these objects are paper and the ink is stable, which is a consideration when choosing how to image all materials, but especially those from the Middle Ages. Here's a full side view. The glass doesn't have to go far into the recess in order to be completely out of view of the camera, which looks straight down on the object. It did take quite a bit of pressure to pull the paper back far enough, and without the handling aid, this would have been extremely difficult and could potentially have harmed the object. Keeping the object safe and maximizing what I can communicate through these objects as a digitizer are always my main goals. Personally, I absolutely love it when I encounter new or challenging materials because it lets me get creative and solve problems, and it's so rewarding to see the outcomes. Which leads me to the digitization process itself. How did it go? At the left, you can see how the object is placed on top of the digitization holding aid, and that I've built shims to keep the glass lifted so that it's only applying a little bit of pressure to the object, just enough to smooth the ripples out a bit without squishing it. I'm looking at the monitor mounted at the left of the copy stand so that I can see what I'm doing in real time and know if I need to make adjustments. I weighed down the glass shims on the sides with weight bags and added an extra weight at the left side so that I could anchor the glass on it while I'm lifting up and positioning the pages. On the right, you can see me lift the glass, turn a page, place the glass, pull back the sheet, and take the shot. I'm also making sure it's tucked right into the gutter, not just placed down for best visibility. I imaged all the manuscript pages first and then the blank backs. I worked with our lead photographer, Wayne, who's sitting at the computer and was doing passive QC, where he checked the images for focus, shadows, script visibility. And we took turns imaging because, to be honest, it was quite painful after a while, leaning over the object, repeatedly lifting the glass, just tough ergonomically. And it's preferable to work with another person when you have a complex or tricky object like this too, because the person who's hands-on can then completely focus on the materials, and the other person can catch any issues in the moment so the work doesn't have to be repeated. All right, now we're ready to look at the digital objects that were produced through this process. This is an example of a Perl persistent URL page for the digital object. Once it gets described, it can be released to our library's catalog record. Here's the bundle with the paper strip tacket, and here's an example of what the backs looked like. It was important to us to capture every aspect of the objects, and personally, I feel that it is essential for every object so that their physical architecture is apparent. These are vertical objects, and one thing that I think about is that it would be beneficial if in the future our image viewer allowed for a vertical scroll or vertical advancing options for materials with that orientation, since we want to make the object's physical nature as easy to comprehend as possible. Here's one of the parchment strip tackets on, and also one of the larger bundles. Another thing that could benefit the user's experience is if it was made more clear that you can rotate images if you need to. For instance, what you saw me do right there was press the R key to rotate counterclockwise, which is a hidden keyboard shortcut. I share a link to the keyboard shortcut tutorial in my links document. Here are 8 of the 9 digitized bundles as they appear online. It's always very rewarding to see the final outcome and how lovely things can be at the very end of the process. It's also a little strange, though, to think about how much effort went into producing these. Meetings and discussions, creating a special holding device, testing and strategizing, strained backs, sore muscles, and how that's not apparent in any way in the digital aspect. And this is just one instance of that invisible labor. There's so many innovations and creative approaches happening behind the Digitization Lab's curtains. Something that I did for these objects, which isn't always necessary, but I thought was particularly important for some of these objects, was to take an additional shot that we included at the end of the file set. On the left is one of the bundles gently flattened under glass, and the shot on the right is the object without glass in all its rippling glory. You can see the dramatic mountain range of shadows on the gray backing paper at the right and left of the document, and the folds at both top corners. Having an extra shot like this is the best of both worlds, an unobstructed image for script readability, as well as a shot that emphasizes the phenomenological features of the object. A digital object can serve multiple purposes, and I strongly feel that not every image has to meet current standards so long as they represent an object in a meaningful way. You can have both standardization and accuracy and, and still let the materials guide you to address any elements that deserve extra, often creative attention. What is accuracy in these cases anyway? That's highly debatable. Here's a look at what the object looks like in the multi-window mirror door comparison environment. As you can see, they're all currently untitled, but that will change after the students complete their description work. Here are some other materials in the collection that may be getting some creative treatment, such as the wax seal in the middle. Wayne and I were playing with what would happen if we use a ring light on glass just over an object and are still evaluating the results. On the right is an example of an oversized document from the next batch we'll be imaging, which you can see has some beautiful embellishments and also deep creases in the parchment that will create challenges during imaging. All this is to say that we do a lot of testing and experimentation in the lab, and some of those things work and others don't. But in cultural heritage imaging, it's important to continue to learn, grow, and expand both our technical capabilities and our thinking on what digitization is and what it's accomplishing on a fundamental level. I want to end with a quote from an essay that I read a couple of weeks ago that had me practically cheering at my desk. Huge shout out to Mache at Cambridge. Photographers, or I'll even say digitizers to include other roles in that workflow, are creators and enablers of research. They're highly specialized technicians who produce important research data. They're often passionate about heritage and play an important part in collection-based research. Despite this, they're rarely credited for their work. Digitization is more than just images. We make the research happen. The digitization process involves the photographer's creative and intellectual input. I want to thank my team, the Stanford Digital Libraries Digital Production Group, some specific coworkers for their support, the medieval team at SFB Virtuelle Lebenswelten, and all of you for your time and attention. I very much look forward to hearing your thoughts and questions later on in the workshop. And a reminder that you can find links to everything mentioned in this presentation at the URL seen here. But just in case the presentation links page is difficult to access or disappears someday, here's a selected list. Thank you.